For decades, Dolly Parton has been the heart and soul of country music, a voice of warmth, laughter, and unshakable spirit. But now, fans around the world are heartbroken as the beloved icon faces a devastating diagnosis that's forcing her to make the hardest decision of her life. In an emotional message, Dolly finally opens up about her health, her future, and the painful truth behind her sudden goodbye. This isn't just another headline, it's the end of an era. Dolly Parton's story begins far from the bright lights and velvet stages. Before the fame, before the rhinestones, there was a little girl in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, born into a one-room cabin where warmth came not from fire, but from love and faith. Her family was poor, not just the kind of poor where you go without, but the kind where hunger becomes a familiar ache and hope feels like a luxury. Her father, Robert Lee, couldn't read or write, but his hands told stories of sacrifice and strength. Her mother, A.V. Lee, stitched scraps of fabric into something that felt like dignity, turning poverty into poetry. In that cabin, with no electricity and no running water, Dolly learned to listen to the sounds of the mountains, the wind, the river, the rhythm of life. Those sounds became her first music. Nights were long and cold, shared under one blanket between 12 children. She remembered waking up to the sound of her siblings breathing beside her, knowing that love was the only warmth they could count on. Summers were no easier. Baths in icy rivers, feet cut on stones, clothes worn thin. But it was in those hardships that Dolly's spirit began to form. She learned early that pain could be survived if you had a song to carry you through it. When she was 9, her baby brother Larry died only 4 days after he was born. There was no funeral, no stone, just a patch of earth and a silence that fell heavy over the family. That silence stayed with Dolly, and she carried it into her music. Later she said that some of her songs were like conversations with him, lullabies for the brother she barely knew but never forgot. At school, when kids laughed at her patchwork coat, she came home in tears, but her mother told her that every stitch was sewn with love. That coat became Coat of Many Colors, one of her most cherished songs, proof that even humiliation can bloom into beauty. Every wound she carried turned into melody. Every hardship became a verse. Dolly didn't sing to be famous. She sang to survive. Her voice was her escape, her prayer, her way of making something beautiful out of a world that gave her very little. And as that small girl stood barefoot on a mountain ridge, singing into the wind, she wasn't dreaming of fame. She was simply trying to make the darkness listen and, for once, sing back. When Dolly Parton left the Smoky Mountains, she was just a teenage girl with a cardboard suitcase, a cheap guitar, and a dream that didn't fit the size of the small town she came from. The bus that carried her to Nashville was old and cold, and the few dollars in her pocket had to stretch farther than seemed possible. But as she watched the hills fade in the rearview mirror, she whispered a promise to herself. "I'll make it, or I won't come back at all." It wasn't pride that drove her, it was hunger, the kind that had nothing to do with food. She needed to prove that her voice, born in the hills, could be heard in the world. Nashville in the 1960s wasn't kind to girls like Dolly. Her accent was too thick, her clothes too bright, her laugh too loud. The men in the studios wanted her to sound softer, sweeter, more like everyone else. They didn't understand that her voice wasn't just sound, it was her life story. Still, she played along at first. She sang what they told her to sing. Songs like Happy, Happy Birthday Baby, pretty tunes with no soul. She smiled for the cameras, but inside she felt hollow. Later, she said, "I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin." When those songs failed, the record label stopped calling. The doors that once cracked open slammed shut again. But Dolly didn't give up. By day, she sang in smoky bars where no one listened. By night, she wrote songs in tiny rented rooms lit by a single lamp. She wrote on napkins, envelopes, the backs of old receipts, anything she could find. Her stomach growled, her hands cramped, but the words kept coming. She didn't write for fame. She wrote because it was the only way to keep herself alive. Her break came in 1966 when she and her uncle Bill Owens wrote a song called Put It Off Until Tomorrow. Another singer recorded it and it became a hit. Suddenly, Nashville wanted to know who this girl was. A year later, her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly, hit the airwaves. It wasn't just an introduction, it was a declaration. Every lyric carried pieces of her past, the hunger, the heartbreak, the hard-earned faith. It was Dolly saying to the world, "This is who I am, and I'm not changing for you." Soon after, she joined the Porter Wagoner Show. Porter was a star at the time, a man with a big voice and an even bigger ego. He took Dolly under his wing, and their chemistry on screen was undeniable. Together, they brought country music into millions of living rooms. But behind the scenes, things weren't as pretty. Porter was protective, controlling, and sometimes jealous of Dolly's rising fame. He wanted her to stay where he thought she belonged, as his sidekick. But Dolly's spirit was too wild for a cage, no matter how golden it was. She respected Porter, even loved him in her own way. But she knew she had to leave to become who she was meant to be. That decision nearly broke her heart. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud, so she wrote them down. "I will always love you." It wasn't just a song, it was a farewell, wrapped in gratitude and pain. When she sang it to him, Porter cried. The world cried later, too, because in her voice was every kind of goodbye, to a mentor, to dependence, to the part of her that had to ask permission to shine. After she walked away, the industry didn't know what to do with her. Some thought she wouldn't last without Porter, but Dolly was already rewriting the rules. In 1973, she released Jolene, and everything changed. The song was simple, a plea, a confession, but it hit like lightning. Everyone knew her name now. With her long blonde hair, her glittering dresses, and her unshakable smile, she became an icon. But what made her special wasn't the look. It was the honesty in her voice. She could sing about jealousy, heartbreak, or faith, and make it sound like she was singing your story. Even as her fame grew, Dolly never forgot where she came from. She mixed business with heart, building her career like her father had built fences, with her hands and grit. The 1970s were brutal years of work. Endless tours, interviews, and recording sessions. Her body ached, her voice cracked, but she never stopped. She said once, "I'd rather wear out than rust out," and she meant it. Still, success came with a cost. The pressure was constant, the expectations heavier with each hit. The glitter began to hide exhaustion. There were nights she walked off stage and collapsed in her dressing room, her sequins clattering against the floor. But she'd get up, fix her hair, and walk out smiling again. To the world, she was unstoppable. Inside, she was holding herself together with sheer willpower. Then came the crossover that changed everything. In 1977, Here You Come Again made her a pop star. Country purists called her a sellout, but Dolly just laughed. "I wasn't leaving country," she said. "I was taking it with me." That's who she was. A woman who never fit into anyone's box because she built her own stage. By the time the 1980s rolled in, Dolly Parton wasn't just a name, she was a force. She starred in 9 to 5, wrote an anthem for working women, and became a symbol of empowerment wrapped in humor and humility. But behind every success was the same barefoot girl from the mountains, still singing to survive, still turning pain into art. Her journey wasn't about fame or money. It was about freedom, the right to tell her story, her way. She once said, "It cost a lot to look this cheap." But behind the joke was truth. Every laugh, every sparkle, every note came from a woman who had fought for her voice and won. And when the lights dimmed and the crowds went home, Dolly would sometimes sit alone with her guitar, her fingers resting on the strings. In those quiet moments, she didn't see a legend. She saw that same mountain girl who once sang to the wind, promising herself she'd make it. She had, but not by luck, by heart, by faith, and by never, ever letting anyone else write her song. For all the fame, the flashing lights, and the laughter that could fill an entire room, Dolly Parton's life was never without shadows. Behind every rhinestone and every smile, there were stories of love and loss that shaped her more than any hit song ever could. Her heart, like her voice, carried both beauty and pain in perfect harmony. She learned early that joy and sorrow often live side by side, and she carried that truth quietly all her life. When Dolly married Carl Dean in 1966, it was nothing like the fairy tale the world might imagine for a rising star. There were no cameras, no gowns, no crowd. Just two young souls in love, standing in a small Baptist church in Georgia. Carl was nothing like the showbiz world Dolly lived in. He was quiet, steady, and uninterested in fame. While she was building an empire, he was happiest at home, working, reading, or simply sitting on the porch. He grounded her. In a world that demanded she always perform, he was the one person who let her just be. No makeup, no spotlight, just herself. Their marriage became the one constant in her whirlwind life. He didn't follow her to red carpets or tours, but he waited for her to come home. And home, for Dolly, wasn't a mansion or a stage. It was Carl's laugh, the smell of his coffee, the peace in his silence. He'd tease her about her wigs and makeup, telling her he preferred her best when she had nothing on her face but a smile. She'd laugh and call him her countryman, and together they built a love story far away from the cameras, a private miracle in a public life. But even love that strong couldn't protect her from life's other heartbreaks. In her 30s, after years of pushing her body through grueling schedules, Dolly received devastating news. She would never be able to have children. The diagnosis of endometriosis and the surgery that followed ended her dream of motherhood forever. She later admitted that when the doctors left the room, she lay there in silence, feeling like her heart had been ripped out. For a woman who had spent her life nurturing others, writing songs like prayers and dreaming of holding a baby of her own, that loss was unbearable. For months after the surgery, she fell into a deep depression. The world saw her smiling on TV, but behind closed doors, she was breaking. She said later that she stopped writing for a while because the songs just wouldn't come. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt painfully quiet. Nights were the worst. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what her life might have looked like if things had been different. But Dolly was never one to stay down for long. Slowly, she began to heal by turning her pain outward, by giving her mother's love to the world. In 1995, she founded the Imagination Library, a program that sends free books to children so that every child, no matter how poor, could dream a little bigger. "If I couldn't have my own children," she said, "I could help raise everyone else's." It was her way of turning grief into grace and love into something eternal. Still, loss followed her through the years. When her mother, Avi Lee, passed away in 2003, Dolly said it felt like the sun had set inside me. The woman who had taught her to be strong, to keep singing through the cold, was gone. For months, Dolly couldn't sing Coat of Many Colors without breaking down. That song, her tribute to her mother's love and pride, had become a wound she could no longer touch. On stage, she would smile, but inside, she was still that little girl longing for her mama's voice in the dark. Then came the loss of her brother, Floyd, in 2018. Floyd wasn't just family. He was her creative twin, her songwriting partner, the one who understood her unspoken feelings. Together, they'd written songs that became part of her legacy, their hearts always in sync. When he died, something inside her fell quiet. There was no big public statement, no televised tribute, just a small funeral in Tennessee, where Dolly sat in silence, her guitar beside her. Friends said she sang softly that day, not for the crowd, but for him. "He understood my heart before I ever spoke," she once said. Now that he's gone, the silence feels different. But perhaps the deepest heartbreak of all came later, when she lost her lifelong companion, her husband, Carl Dean. After nearly 60 years together, Carl passed away quietly in 2025 at their home in Nashville. To the world, Dolly was still a legend, but in that moment, she was simply a widow. The woman who had written 1,000 love songs suddenly found herself without the man she wrote them for. She planned his funeral herself, filling the small chapel on their property with his favorite wildflowers and old photographs that no magazine had ever seen. During the service, she read a letter Carl had written years before. "You were always my shining star. But I never needed the world to know, just you." By the time she finished reading, her voice broke, and every person in that room wept with her. Then she picked up her old guitar, the one he'd given her before her first hit, and played a song she had written for him long ago, one no one else had ever heard. It was a farewell, a love letter in melody. After that, the house they shared for so many years grew unbearably quiet. Dolly said she still found herself setting 2 cups at the breakfast table, out of habit. Some mornings she'd hear a creak on the porch and almost expect to see him there. "It feels like my songs left with him," she whispered once. And yet, even through the grief, she kept going, because that's what he would have wanted. In her later years, Dolly came to understand love in its truest form, not as something that saves you, but as something that stays with you, even when the person is gone. She once said, Love is like a song that never really ends. It just changes key. And that's how she carried all of it. Her mother's hands, her brother's laughter, her husband's quiet strength. Inside every note she sang. Her songs about heartbreak weren't just stories. They were pieces of her life, sung softly so others could find comfort in them too. Because for Dolly Parton, love and loss were never enemies. They were partners. Two sides of the same melody that taught her how to feel deeply, forgive freely, and keep singing even when the world fell silent. At 79, Dolly Parton stands in a quiet season of her life. The spotlight that once burned so bright has softened now, fading into a warm glow that feels more like candlelight than fireworks. She's no longer running from one concert to the next, no longer smiling through exhaustion for the sake of an audience. Instead, she's slowing down, reflecting, breathing. The same woman who once carried the world on her shoulders now carries only what truly matters: faith, love, and the memories of a lifetime that feels like a song finally reaching its last verse. Her sister's recent message, asking fans to pray for her, sent ripples across the world. She hasn't been feeling her best, Frida wrote, and within hours millions of people joined in prayer. It wasn't just concern, it was love. Pure, grateful love for a woman who had carried so many through their own storms. The idea that Dolly, the eternal light of country music, could be fragile was hard for people to accept. She had always seemed untouchable, a symbol of resilience, joy, and faith. But time, as always, has its way of reminding us that even legends are human. In recent months, her health has forced her to rest. Doctors urged her to slow down, to cancel shows, to give her body the grace it had earned after a lifetime of giving everything. She postponed her Las Vegas concerts. Her voice quieter now, her steps slower. And though she still smiles for the cameras, there's a tenderness in her eyes, a kind of knowing. She often says she isn't afraid of dying, only of leaving things unfinished. It's not death that scares her, but silence. The idea of leaving a song unsung. Still, even in this quieter chapter, Dolly refuses to fade. She calls it her season of stillness, but even her stillness hums with purpose. Most mornings begin the same way. She wakes before the sun, pours 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and walks the short path to the small cedar chapel on her property. The air there smells of wood and candle wax, the same place where she said goodbye to her husband, Carl. She sits in the front pew, sometimes in silence, sometimes humming softly. These are songs no one else will ever hear, written for the ones she's lost, and the God she still trusts completely. Her voice, though weaker now, carries the same warmth it always did. It trembles a little, but somehow that makes it more beautiful, like silk beginning to fray, soft and honest. "I think God gave me this voice to help people feel less alone," she said once. And even now, that purpose hasn't changed. She still writes, not for charts or fame, but for comfort. Her small home studio is filled with old photos, worn guitars, and yellowed lyrics, scribbled in her unmistakable handwriting. When the world outside feels heavy, she retreats there and writes songs that sound like prayers, gentle melodies about gratitude, aging, and grace. The woman who once filled stadiums now fills notebooks, her legacy written one quiet page at a time. She doesn't count her success by awards anymore, though she has dozens, or by money, though she's earned more than she ever dreamed. She measures it in lives touched. A letter from a single mother who said Dolly's songs got her through heartbreak. A photo from a child holding a book from the imagination library, smiling at words that opened new worlds. Those moments are the currency she treasures most now. "I don't need a monument," she said once. "My songs are enough." Even as her body slows, her humor hasn't dimmed. In interviews, she still laughs the same golden laugh that made the world fall in love with her decades ago. When asked about her upcoming procedures, she quipped, "Honey, they're not the kind I used to get from my plastic surgeon." Beneath the joke, though, was her old truth. That faith has always been her anchor. "The Lord's got me," she said with that same steady smile, and no one who's followed her story could doubt it. The truth is, Dolly's legacy was never just in the music. It's in her kindness, her way of making people feel seen, even from a stage miles away. It's in the way she never pretended to be perfect. She laughed at her flaws, owned her mistakes, and turned her scars into art. Her story isn't just about success. It's about survival. about a woman who climbed from a one-room cabin to the top of the world and still found room in her heart for everyone else. Now, when she walks through her Nashville home, every corner holds a memory. A photo of her and Carl on their porch swing, her mother's worn sewing basket, her brother's old guitar. Sometimes she stops and hums softly, her hand brushing over the strings. The air feels full, not with sadness, but with gratitude. She's lived through loss, through fame, through exhaustion and heartache, and somehow, she's still standing. Maybe not as tall, maybe not as strong, but just as full of light. She often says that when her time comes, she hopes to leave the world singing instead of crying. And in a way, she already has. Her songs, thousands of them, are her eternal voice. Jolene, Coat of Many Colors, I Will Always Love You, they're not just hits, they're hymns of her life. They'll keep playing long after the applause stops, carrying her story into hearts that haven't even been born yet. In quiet moments, Dolly admits that she feels closer to heaven than ever before. Not in a morbid way, but with peace. She believes she'll see everyone she's lost again, her parents, her siblings, her husband, and that when she does, she'll finally rest. Until then, she keeps writing, keeps loving, keeps shining, and maybe that's the truest part of her legacy. Not the fame, not the fortune, but the faith that carried her through it all. The world will remember Dolly Parton not just as the queen of country, but as a woman who showed that kindness can be stronger than pain, that laughter can outlast sorrow, and that music, when it comes from the heart, never really dies. When the lights go out for good and the stage falls silent, her voice will still echo, soft, steady, eternal, whispering the same truth she's always believed, that love, sung honestly, can outlive everything.